now take the precedent for the Planning Committee by roll call. The following members are present: Councillors Alec Allison, John Anderson, John Bradley, Jackie Burns. Councillor Margaret Cowie.
I'm here, Stuart.
Councillor Peter Craig is present. I have apologies from Councillor Maureen Devlin. Is Councillor Convery present?
Here, Stuart.
Councillor Mary Donnelly. Councillors Isabel Dorman and Fiona Dryber are present. I have apologies from Councillor Lindsay Hamilton. Councillor Faulkner present. Councillor Faulkner. Councillor Ian Harrow. Councillors Mark Horsham, Anne LeBlond and Martin Lennon are present. Councillor Joe Lowe. Councillor Ian McCallan is present. Councillor David McLaughlin.
Here.
Apologies from Councillor Lynn Nayland. Councillor Carol Nugent.
Just having IT difficulties.
Yeah.
Councillor Nugent is?
Yes. She'll join when she can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor John Ross. Councillor Graham Scott is present. Councillor David Shearer.
Here.
The councillors Bert Thompson and Jim Wartaw are present. I've also taken a note of the officers that are present. I'll now pass back to the chair for today's business. Thank you.
Stuart, it's Margaret Cooper here. I'm here. If Joe Lowe doesn't appear, I'll sub for him.
Okay, you can't switch in the middle of a meeting, Councillor Cooper, so you would need to take the decision just now, and if you are acting as a substitute, then if Councillor Lowe does arrive, he wouldn't be able to attend the meeting, he would only be able to observe.
Right, I'll just substitute for him then.
Thank you.
Stuart, just to let you know, I've joined the meeting. Mary Donnelly.
Thanks, Councillor Donnelly.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 2 of the minute.
Chair, sorry.
Isabella, I had my hand up.
Hand raised.
Apologies. Go ahead.
Can I declare an interest in agenda item 3? The applicant and 2 of the objectors are personally known to me.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I hadn't noticed your hand. We agree the minutes of the previous meeting. That's on pages 5 to 12.
Agreed. Agreed.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry, someone was speaking there.
Aye, Chair, it's Councillor Faulkner. I don't think I'm registered. He's just got in. His IT problems, Chair. He's just got in. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, agenda item 3. We'll wait for Councillor Cowie to leave.
That's Councillor Cowie now left the meeting, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. So agenda item 3 is application P21-0662, and that's on pages 13 to 24. And Tina will speak to the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. This is a detailed planning application by a Mr Zazia at 62 Fernbury Avenue for the erection of a single-storey front and rear extensions to an existing semi-detached house. The property is semi-detached, as I say, and surrounded by other residential properties to the west and north and east. The applicant seeks consent for the erection of a single-storey extension at the front, which would project 2.7 metres and would be 3.9 metres in height and 4.9 metres in width, and would provide a front porch area. The rear extension would project 3.9 metres from the existing rear building line, measures approximately 5 metres in height at the highest point, and is 5 metres wide, and would provide a sun lounge accommodation. When the application was originally submitted, the proposed front extension did project further. It was originally 4 metres from the existing front building line, but through discussions with planning services, because we felt that was excessive in terms of a front porch, the plan was amended and submitted. The projection that we now have, as I say, is 2.7. In terms of neighbour notification, we carried that out, and there was a total of 14 objections and 7 letters of comment received at the outset, and the points are set out in full in section 5 of the report. I would highlight the main points which relate to privacy and amenity, and also to concerns about construction. In terms of privacy and amenity, the window-to-window distances have been checked, and the distance between the proposed extension and the property to the rear does meet the residential development guide and exceeds the 20-metre minimum distance as set out in the guide. The revised plans, as I say, contain now contain 2 windows on the western elevation, and the windows would be located 4 metres from the neighbouring property at number 64, where the rear garden is screened by the existing boundary fence. So we don't think that's an issue because it's single storey, and don't think it would have a detrimental impact on overlooking at that point. The original submission for the front extension included glazing along the eastern elevation of the property of the proposal. However, the amended version only contains 1 window, and it's been repositioned to prevent any direct overlooking into the neighbouring property. So again, we're satisfied that that doesn't impact on amenity. In terms of construction, it is accepted that it's quite a tight area. The school, Fernhill School, is opposite, so there are zigzag lines there and limited available parking. However, the residents there have to work within that. In terms of construction, we've attached a condition at number 2 requiring details of parking and access for the construction vehicles. So we would get a scheme on that. Turning to our assessment and conclusion, the scale of the proposed extensions are fairly modest, and now that the front extension has been reduced, we're satisfied that it's acceptable. Concern has been raised regarding the privacy issues, but again, looking at it in detail with the window changes and the floor area reduced, we don't think there is any amenity issue, certainly within window-to-window distances. So we're happy. The proposal does conform with development plan policy. It meets the residential development guide, so we're recommending that planning consent is granted.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions for Tina? I don't see any hands up, so I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll wait for Councillor Cowie to come back in.
Councillor Cowie, can I just check you have returned to the meeting, please?
Yes, Stuart, I'm here. Thanks.
Chair, can I just mention the fact that Carol still is unable to get in, maybe get IT to contact her?
Chair, IT have already been contacted, so
okay, thank you.
We'll get back in.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, and that's application P210332, and that's on pages 37 to 48. Sorry, on pages 25 to 36. And we'll also take agenda item 5, application P210333, 0333 on pages 37 to 48. And Bernard will present these two together, but they'll be moved separately. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, I'll take both of these items 4 and 5 together as they have been submitted by the same applicant and both relate to the same existing business premises. For both applications, permission is sought to form an area of hard standing to provide an enlarged external storage area and associated works. Both applications relate to land which is almost 2 hectares in size and covered in scrub. Adjacent to both sites are premises operated by Marshalls plc, who are a major manufacturer and distributor of pavers. Engineering operations would be undertaken and material imported to form the area of hard standing, which would be linked to the existing premises. In terms of the local plan, the area falls within the settlement boundary and forms part of a designated core industrial and business area, and therefore raises no policy issues. No objections have been raised from consultees subject to the use of appropriate conditions, and these comments are summarised in section 4 of the report. In particular, roads and transportation will require suitable sightlines to be formed at the access, and also payment of a contribution towards the maintenance of the access road due to the potential for increased vehicle movements. There were no objections received to either application. In general land use terms and policy terms, the principle of a business and industrial development at this location is acceptable. The proposed development would allow the existing business premises to expand as a result of the closure of their Falkirk depot. This will result in employment opportunities while also allowing the relocation of existing employees from their Falkirk operation. In total, the workforce will increase from 45 staff to 63 staff. The design, layout and scale of the development are considered to be acceptable, along with the impact on the surrounding area. It's considered that the proposals for the hard-standing extensions are acceptable, given they are associated with an existing large-scale industrial plant. No letters of objection were received, and there were no adverse comments from consultees subject to conditions. Overall, the proposal represents an appropriate form of development for the site, and therefore it is recommended that detailed planning permission is granted for both applications, subject to payment of a financial contribution relating to road maintenance.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions for Bernard on either item 4 or 5? I'll move agenda item 4.
I'll second it, Chair.
Agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'll move agenda item 5.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Next item is agenda item 6, and that's application P211525, and that is in pages 49 to 64, and the last Tony to speak to the item. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Donnelly, get your hand up.
Sorry, not to do with the paper. It's just to let you know David Shearer's been put out the meeting.
Yeah, Chair, I'm just about to advise IT of that as well.
Fantastic, Stuart.
Chair, I've managed to get back in.
All right, thanks, David.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand over to Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So detailed planning permission is sought for the construction and operation of a battery storage system on land at Downey Bray Road in Rutherglen. The site sits wholly within the former Sanmex industrial complex, which is now being demolished, and the site's currently vacant. Approximately 150 metres southeast of the site lies the Scottish Power Dalmarnock grid supply point. So the proposals involve the siting of up to 24 battery storage containers with an overall height of 2.9 metres, around about 10 feet. The site would be secure and the proposed include equipment to allow 24-hour monitoring of the batteries remotely. Just in terms of the planning history, in March 2016, the Planning Committee granted permission in principle for a mixed-use development that comprised retail use, hot food takeaways, a restaurant, and Class 11 leisure use. And that was on the whole of the former Sanmex site. That permission was renewed through an application granted in April 2019, and so that permission is still live. In terms of consultations, no objections have been received from consultees in terms of technical matters, and that includes road safety, flood risk and environmental matters such as noise. Section 5 of the report highlights that 8 letters of objection have been received. Matters raised include the proximity of the proposals to housing, flood risk, noise, visual impact, and the potential for the batteries to go on fire. So in response to some of those issues, firstly, the nearest housing is approximately 150 metres away from the site boundary and is separated from the site either by the River Clyde or by existing public roads. The site's on land that is designated for employment uses in the LDP. It's also subject of that exam permission for a mixed-use development, including uses that all have a similar level of potential impact in relation to the existing amenity of the area. So environmental services are contend that the proposals would meet required noise limits, and so therefore it's considered the proposals, the location in relation to residential properties as acceptable, and there wouldn't be a harm upon the amenity of the area. In terms of flood risk, neither SEPA or the flood risk management team in the Council of Objections. In terms of visual impact, the design of the containers is functional, but they're not of a scale that would have a dominating visual impact upon the surrounding area. And finally, if the proposals are granted permission, the operator would have to comply with all health and safety requirements, and that would include looking at the fire risk issues that are being raised by objectors. So turning to the assessment, the sites on land are designated as a core industrial and business area within the adopted local development plan, where policy states that these areas are to be retained for industrial and business use, and any exceptions must have a justification for locating within that area. So in this particular case, the principle of redeveloping the site for an alternative use has already been established by the ex-ante permissioning principle. In addition, there's a specific locational need can be shown by a location of the proposals close to the grid supply point. That would allow the minimum amount of transmission infrastructure required to connect the battery storage proposals to the national grid. The site's been vacant for several years, and it's considered that the loss of this relatively small area of the overall designation would not have a significant impact on the quantity, range and quality of employment land in the area. And battery storage itself is considered a quasi-industrial use that would be compatible with an employment area as well. So it's therefore considered the proposals accord with the relevant criteria and provisions of the local development plan in terms of land use. The design proposed, as I said, is functional, involves the setting up of the 24 containers to house the batteries, but the scale of the proposals is very similar to the existing grid supply point. And this results in the proposals being in keeping with the character of the surrounding area, and there wouldn't be a dominant form in the surrounding street scene. So in conclusion, it's considered that the proposed development is acceptable, it complies with the local development plan, and therefore it's recommended that permission be granted.
Thank you, Johnny. Councillor Lennon?
I've got a few questions about it, about this development. I mean, one of the first ones that kind of jumps out to me is that it's mentioned that the nearest residential buildings or the nearest homes are 150 metres away. I can only assume from that the nearest residential properties are being taken to be the flats on I always say it's Bardonald Street, but I think that might not actually be how you pronounce it. Baronald Street, just further down. But I don't think that's quite strictly accurate, because I've looked at this, and actually the closest residential properties that I can identify is the Downbarry Estate, where there's like quite a large and well established show people community, and that's only, it's less than half that distance. So I was wondering, is that just like an oversight, or has this just not been taken into consideration?
Yeah, Councillor Lennon, through you, Chair. I think in terms of the impact on those properties, including the show people, the noise impact assessment does accommodate everything within the vicinity. So that shows that there'd be no impact in terms of noise, in particular, on those properties. And Environmental Services have considered that noise impact assessment and are happy with the conclusions. So So yes, that was an error in the report, but the residential element in the area has been taken account of, Councillor Lennon.
Okay. So from our perspective, just like knowing the local area as well, I don't think this is really a suitable development. I understand that there's been a principle maybe set with the idea that this land should be made used for employment purposes, but I think there is quite a large kind of qualitative difference between employment purposes like restaurants or a retail or a mixed development like that, and something that is just kind of more industrial or quasi-industrial. I think it was described as, from my perspective, as someone who knows the area quite well, this is an area that's kind of undergoing quite a long-term kind of transformation from being almost exclusively industrial and quasi-industrial. It's becoming increasingly more a kind of leisure area and more a residential area. You know, the opening of the Cunningar Loop Park, the kind of ongoing development of the retail park across the road with Tesco and Home Bargains and kind of all the rest. And indeed, the kind of ongoing surrounding permissions for more and more residential development. And even, across the boundary, I know we're not supposed to pay attention to what happens in other authorities necessarily, but, it's the Athletes' Village. It's becoming more and more of a residential area. So kind of taking all that into consideration, I don't think that having more industrial infrastructure there's really the direction that we want to be going down. But I do have a particular concern about that era. I think that particularly with communities that are difficult to engage with, who are very often kind of marginalised both by wider society and also unfortunately by local authorities or kind of public bodies as a whole. I think that having an era there where it's almost as if that this community doesn't exist or not, on the face of it, it doesn't seem to have been taken into consideration. That really does kind of strike up a bit of a red flag to me. So I would be moving that we refuse this application because I think that the proper impact hasn't been taken into consideration on the residential areas. I think that based on what's in front of us here, a kind of key constituency there's just been ignored. But also as part of the ongoing plan and the kind of direction of travel of this area, I don't think that it's a suitable development at this time.
Tony, do you want to come back in at that point?
Well, I think in terms of the impact on the wider area, Councillor Lennon's right. I think the direction of the area is towards away from the traditional industrial uses within the area. But I think in this case, as I mentioned in my presentation, there's probably a really strong specific locational need here in the fact it's located very close to the grid supply point. And that's one of the reasons why the applicants have chosen this particular site, because of that connection and the ability to immediately connect into that infrastructure. The containers, they're very small scale. I think it's fair to say they will have a quasi-industrial element to it, but I think that's what's currently the site allocated for in the local development plan is for industrial use and employment use. So I don't think that's particularly out of keeping with what's identified for this particular site, taking account, but take an understanding of what's happening in the wider area.
Okay, just to respond to that particular point there, I understand why the applicant think that this is a suitable site, but that is why we ultimately have a planning committee. I disagree with them. I understand it's convenient for them, but I think this site's convenient for them, but I don't think that they're appropriate for this site. So yeah, I'd move that we refuse.
I'll take the other questions first, if that's okay. Councillor Warto?
Yeah, I think this is a great development. I would like to see a lot more developments like this in South Lanarkshire. We have a lot of wind turbines in South Lanarkshire, and when it's windy, we have to shut them down because we can't use the electricity. And I think, there's a scope in South Lanarkshire for a lot more storage facilities like this, even hydrogen generation. And the site has to be, to be close to the grid distribution points. And I think that's something that this site has. And overall, I think this is a good development, and I would like to see a lot more like it.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. No, I can agree with Councillor Lennon there. I mean, we've got to think of people as well, and these travelling people, or show people, sorry, I should say, do stay near here, and I don't think they have been consulted or taken into consideration. Doesn't it look as if they have? Apart from that, I understand it's got to be, once it's built, it'll be viewed remotely. So it's not got to create anybody going to work in and out of work at any economic development there. There's nothing to boost the local economy or nothing if it's got to be viewed economically. So I don't think it's a good place at all, and I'd agree with Councillor Lennon. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit of a sore throat there, sorry about that. I'm of a mind to agree with Councillor Lennon in terms of the fact that over the years, and I was somebody who served on the Clyde Gateway Board for several years, there was always an inference that we move people towards the land down there, that we involve more estates, more people living near that area, going down towards the Clyde. It can be attractive. Yes, there's some ex-industrial sites down there. I mean, this is an old bleach factory, but there's always been a movement. I mean, 20 years ago, there wouldn't have been anyone within half a mile. And hopefully Councillor Lennon's local knowledge will confirm that. There has been a gradual movement of people towards the old industrial sites and the Clyde, and of course, great developments like the park at Cunningar Loop. So there has been a gradual movement of people and residences down towards that site. And obviously, Tony's report says 150 metres. There's also the point of the show people that I suspect, am I right in saying that the show people site is literally next to the fence of the site, or within less than 100 metres of the fence of the boundary of the potential site? And I'm saddened that there's been an oversight of the show people residencies there. I also think there's, I can understand Councillor Wattles' enthusiasm to jump on the bandwagon of anything that's to do with renewals and storage. But these are new technologies. The public are going to have to get used to them. The public are going to have to gain confidence in them. And I don't think the public, and we are the custodians of the public in many ways, I think there's a lack of confidence in the new technologies, the new industrial processes, like battery storage of electricity, like carbon capture, hydrogen type developments. I think we're going to have to bring the people on slightly slower than this application is trying to do. So I'm certainly, if Councillor Lennon moves refusal, I'll gladly second that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, just to ask, I mean, I'm very much pro, I mean, battery storage isn't new, but, you know, I'm very much for the project. But the question I have is, have the people who would normally be notified within the boundary area, have they been notified, or has that not taken place properly?
I can perhaps answer that one, Chair, if that's okay. Yes, the statutory neighbour notification was carried out. It's anybody within 20 metres of any part of the site, so none of the residential properties that we're talking about would have been specifically notified. However, the application was advertised in the local press, so that would have given people opportunity to see that and to view the plans and make representations. Just in terms of the show people, Councillor Lennon is probably right. It is around about 75 metres from the closest point of the site. It adjoins the former Sandmex complex, but the application site, it's within that complex, so it's not immediately adjacent to the show people. And I would say condition 8 on the papers apart does set out a fairly robust condition in terms of noise limits that would be permissible. So the amenity in that respect would be protected.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Convery?
Thanks very much, Chair. Chair, I think there's been a massive faux pas here by the planning department. I mean, Tony makes a point, well, it would be in the paper. That's totally irrelevant. If the closest proximity of residential housing are the show people. Now, I'm not going to give away my age, but I can remember that site being there 30, 40 years ago. It's a well-established residential area. And for the planning note to have that in, and to say that it's a red sandstone block of flats it's nearest to it, is factually incorrect. So the members of this committee are not being furnished with the true facts. Now, that's a major error by any planning officer to do, because basically, and Martin Lennon made the valid point, these are human beings we're talking about. They've lived there basically as long as I can remember, and yet we're not taking that into consideration. But the most important part's not been addressed either. The fire risk. We've not involved Strathclyde Fire Brigade to see what the fire risk would be. We'll wait till we build it and then we'll worry about the fire risk. No, you make sure there's no fire risk before you build anything. So there are two major points that I would hope all my colleagues would take into consideration before we vote on this, because it's a major faux pas to not include these people who just happen to live in caravans rather than a traditional style house. But that site's been there for as long as I can remember as a wee boy when I lived in Castlemilk many, many years ago and used to get by in the bus. So I think it's something that it should be thrown out for that particular reason, and the fire risk as well. Two major points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, just on those 2 points, I think in terms of the fire risk, the report mentions that that's the responsibility of the Health and Safety Executive, and it's not a planning matter per se. But and I'm maybe jumping ahead here in terms of what I'm going to say here, but that particular issue, and perhaps the one in relation to the impact on the shore people, we could go away and revisit those issues and report back in February if that's okay. I'm just suggesting that. There might be within members a fundamental concern about the principle of this form of development, but we could certainly go away and revisit those two particular issues if that would help.
Thanks, Tony. I'll bring in Pauline Elliott at this point and then Councillor Donnelly after Pauline. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, Tony's basically said what I was going to come in and say, Chairman. I'm picking up members just quiet about a couple of points on the report. I mean, I would ask members to defer the report so we can come back with additional information that you feel is lacking, both about the consideration of the impact on the show village and other issues that might just give you a bit more comfort moving forward. So if you would consider a deferral rather than a refusal, bearing in mind it is an industrial site, it's an industrial use, energy storage and renewable energy is is carrying additional weight in terms of Scottish planning policy. I mean, I am fearful, members, that if you were to refuse the application, the council wouldn't be in a particularly strong position at appeal. And, you know, I do have to caution you about that. However, I do feel that in making a decision at the moment, you're saying to us that you don't have all the relevant information. So I would like you to be able to make a decision with all that information before you. So if you would consider deferral, please, members. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. I'll take the rest of the questions first before we make a decision on that, if that's okay. Councillor Donnelly?
Yeah, that was my point. I was going to move referral, defer to explore the 2 points and then come back to another committee meeting. So I do move deferral.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin?
Thanks, Chair. What I wanted to ask is, we'll probably come at a reconvened meeting, but the point has been made about the distance from the nearest houses. You make that point for a reason. Can you give me the reason why you would need to point out that there was a need, or this is given some sort of good reason as to why it should go ahead because there is a distance,
what are the risks? Fire has been mentioned. I don't know. This is all new technology to everyone, so I wonder what are the risks and why it's important that you've mentioned that it is a certain distance. Why is it so important to note that?
Yeah, through you, Chair, Councillor McLaughlin. One of the main objections from the people who did object to the application was relating to the proximity of the site and the proposal to residential properties. And I think the particular issue was around about noise we generated from the proposal. So it was just to try and make members aware of that relationship between the housing and the battery storage units. Making the point that environmental services have reviewed the noise impact assessment. They've got no concerns with the way the assessment was carried out or the conclusions. So it was just to try and make that point about the proximity, particularly in terms of noise. As I say, the fire risk issue isn't technically a planning matter, but if we do defer the application, I can certainly go to consultees and get their advice on this particular one, if to help members take a view.
Supplementary, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know if it's in the report, but has there been any input at all from Health and Safety as regards this application? Has there been any comments and input? Have they been consulted?
Yeah, through you, Chair. No, Health and Safety Executive are a statutory consultee, but in very limited circumstances, and this wouldn't be one. I think if we were to consult them on this, they would just come back and say, we've got no comments. But what we can maybe look at is look at perhaps consulting the fire service, for example, and to get some further advice on this particular aspect of the proposal. I would say as well, I mean, there's no evidence at all of any other battery storage proposals going on fire anywhere in the country. So we'll look at that as well, just get some evidence and information for you to look at next time.
Chair, with your indulgence, I think it'd be good if we get some scientific input here, because it is new technology. I've never heard of any battery storage. I know Jim Morton made the point. Renewable energies are very good, wind power, solar power, all the rest of it. But you really need to have storage, but where you're going to have it is the issue. I don't know any sites. I've never heard of any sites. Now, so I think we need to be armed with some information as to what the risks are. And I think maybe, I don't know if the Health and Safety Executive are as well versed as they might be. So I think we need a bit of sort of scientific input here as to what are the risks of battery storage, because there have been so few of them, and if there hasn't been any fires, that's only because there hasn't been. That may well be only because there hasn't been any fires yet. But the storage facility there, 40 megawatts, I'm no engineer, but that sounds like a hell of a lot. And if something went wrong in there, goodness knows what the consequences of that might be. So I think, yeah, getting Scottish Fire and Rescue to have an input, but I would quite like some more scientific evidence as to what are the risks in something like this type of storage. I've got a tiny bit of experience personally with solar panels and storage batteries in a camper van. But it's tiny in comparison to something like that, and things can go wrong. Batteries can overheat. You have temperature sensors on just a small 12-volt battery in a van, and you have temperature sensors on them for a reason, because the batteries can overheat, and if they overheat, they can go on fire. But something that size, I don't know what the risks are, but I would like to know, and if that could be included in any other hearing that we have as regards to this application, that'd be helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, through you, Chair. We'll prepare an updated report covering the issues that have been raised this morning. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I was only going to suggest that that I'll second Mary Donnelly's motion to defer for further information to be provided at the February Planning Committee.
Councillor Lennon, your hand's still up. Is it a legacy?
No, I was hoping to come back in just to kind of sum up, because I think that obviously, I've moved to just reject this outright, and while I appreciate the offer to defer and maybe to gain a little bit more information about things, I really, I think that to an extent it wouldn't be addressing the real substantive concerns that I've got. Yes, ultimately we could get some more details about fire risks and stuff, and obviously it's always better to have more information with regards to health and safety. But my actual concern here is about a loss of amenity, and it's about not only about a loss of amenity for the residential properties, but the loss of potential future amenity of like the economic development that this site could otherwise provide. Like, it has been given planning permission more than once to have a mixed development that would actually provide jobs for local people, that would actually provide services for local people, that would actually enhance this area as like a destination for people to come from outside to use the park, to use the restaurants that have been given planning permission, to actually make use of this as like an ongoing and increasingly vibrant part of the community. Now, to replace that with yet more industrial infrastructure, which is exactly the use of this land that the long-term strategy has been to move away from, I think it's a real strategic failure. I think that this land has been given planning permission for uses that will actually benefit the local area, that will enhance the amenity, that will kind of link in with other ongoing developments that are happening on the other side of the river, on our side of the river, across the Marnock Road, further up towards the Cunningar Loop. The Cunningar Loop, as a park, has been a huge success. It's looking to expand further. We should really be looking to kind of allow these strengths and these use cases to kind of feed off each other, and to give up a large chunk of this site for yet more, remote monitored industrial kind of nothingness. Quite apart from the fact that, some people might be reassured to hear that, well, it's safe, there isn't a real fire risk. Brilliant, but there's a huge cost in terms of the opportunity and the use that this land could otherwise provide. And I think that's the real detriment, and that's the reason that I'm opposing it. So I can't imagine what new information is going to change my mind on this point. I just think that this use is wrong for this site. And I am very enthusiastic about renewable energy. I've never met a wind farm that I didn't like. If you want to put a wind farm on the Cunningar Loop, I think that would be a potential use case. It would be great. We can have all the renewable infrastructure that we want, but the batteries ultimately could go more or less anywhere. They could go next to another access point for the grid. But how about we just don't have it in the area that we're trying to create as a residential and as a leisure area? I think giving up acres and acres of that space for another kind of low density, remote monitored industrial use, I think it's a real failure of planning, and I think it would be a real travesty if we made that call.
Just for some clarity, do you still want to move for refusal?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, just want to clarify that. Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, very, very, very quickly, Chair. Just to go back, apart from the safety and all the other things that have been discussed, economically, we've been told, just to repeat myself, economically it's got to be viewed remotely. So if I would feel a bit more easy, see if it was some economic development or employment is going to happen, there's got to be a footfall of people going through there and other people would benefit. There's nothing like that happening. So that and other reasons there, I would I've got to agree, I think, with Councillor Lennon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll have to go to a vote on this one then, Stuart. Sorry, Councillor Scott, you want to come in?
Right, Chair, just a slight delay in getting in here. Again, it's the point. I mean, I think the idea of a deferral is a good idea, but I take Councillor Lennon's point that this is not just about there's a point of principle here. That I understand the point of principle that Councillor Lennon is moving. That there has been to use the corny phrase now, a direction of travel towards this being a residential area. And I say the developments over the years, even when in my time as chair of planning, it was always to be move residences down towards former industrial zone land, and of course the magnificent development at Cunningar Loop. There's been a direction of travel towards residential. So I take the point that the principle in terms of what Councillor Lennon is saying, that there's a point of the refusal is a point of principle. I take the point that in Councillor Convery's point that we have to get the fire, at some point we have to get the fire and rescue service on board about the actual risks of a battery storage unit But as I say, I think the deferral's a good offer and a tempting offer, but I take the point of principle from Councillor Lennon, and I'll continue to second his move for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll have to move to the vote then, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We'll take the proposal moved by Councillor Lennon, seconded by Councillor Scott as the motion, given that was the one that was proposed first. So that's that the planning application is refused. Can I just clarify on the grounds of the refusal, please, Councillor Lennon?
Yes, loss of amenity to local residents and also economic development. I think that's a poor application from an economic development perspective, given the already existing permissions on the site.
Okay, and the amendment moved by Councillor Donnelly and seconded by Councillor Cooper is that the application be deferred for consideration at a future meeting. So just to clarify in terms of the motion, it's that the plan application be refused on the grounds of loss of amenity to local residents and in terms of economic development. Okay, so...
And the amendment is to explore the 2 points that have been raised in the discussion, like keep saying travelling folk, but it's not travelling folk. But them being omitted from this report is really remiss of this committee. And I would seriously be upset if this paper went forward without their inclusion in it.
Thanks, Councillor Donnelly. So if you could please indicate your voting intention, Councillor Ali Callison. Councillor Allison.
Apologies, sorry, I didn't realise computer was muted. Defer.
Councillor Anderson.
Defer.
Councillor Bradley.
Defer.
Councillor Buchanan, I note that you're now in the meeting, but I'm not sure at what stage you joined the meeting, whether you're able to vote on this item or not.
I missed half, due to IT problems, I missed half the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackie Burns.
Defer.
Councillor Jerry Convery.
The motion, Chair.
Councillor Margaret Cooper.
Defer.
Councillor Alan Faulkner.
Motion, please.
Sorry, I took that out of turn. Councillor Margaret Cowie.
Motion.
Councillor Peter Craig.
Defer.
Councillor Mary Donnelly.
Hold on. Defer.
Councillor Isabel Dorman.
Defer.
Councillor Mark Horsham.
Defer.
Councillor Martin Lennon.
Refuse.
Councillor Ian McCallan.
Defer.
Councillor David McLaughlin.
Motion.
Councillor Carol Nugent.
Defer.
Councillor Graham Scott.
Motion.
Councillor David Shearer.
Defer.
Councillor Bert Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Jim Mortaugh.
Defer.
13 members have voted in favour of the amendment and 7 members voted in favour of the motion. I therefore declare the amendment carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Agenda item 7 is application P211228, and that's on pages 65 to 76. And I'll ask Tina to take us through the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. It is a detailed planning application by Mr Willie Allison for an agricultural workers' house opposite Lake Laherron Farm, East Kilbride. The application site relates to a small area of agricultural land, bounded to the north by Millwell Road, to the south and east by farmland associated with the farm, and to the west by High Claherron Road. The applicant is seeking planning permission to erect the farm workers, agricultural workers dwelling house within the site, with an associated access and car parking area. The proposed dwelling house is for the applicant's son, who is taking on much of the farm operations at Lake Laherron Farm, and supporting justification has been provided with regard to the existing and proposed operations on the farm. The proposed house is relatively modest, single storey with 3 bedrooms. A new access to serve the dwelling house, as I say, would be taken from High Claherron Road, 50 metres south of the junction with Millwell Road. Landscaping planting would be put in place on the eastern and southern boundaries of the site to separate the residential house plot from the adjacent farmland. In terms of representations, we did receive 9 letters of representation, and that was 6 letters of objection and 1 letter of comment and 2 letters of support. The points raised have been considered and are set out in section 5 of the report. I would highlight the main issue really relates to the principle of development, and in response, as I've said, the proposed development is directly associated with an agricultural use and is necessary in order to allow the associated business to appropriately function. The scale, design and siting of the development is also considered to be appropriate. The applicants have provided the supporting justification detailing the need for the agricultural workers' dwelling to be provided in respect of the applicant's son, who already works in the farm. And in association with the justification, we've also received a report from the Scottish Agricultural College, and that's been provided in respect of the farm. And the planning service is therefore satisfied that the details provided represent sufficient justification for a house at this location. Turning to our assessment and conclusions, we do have the justification. It does include the report from the Scottish Agricultural College, and it's noted in the report that it confirms that the business is a long-established business, financially sound, and there is a genuine need for the proposed dwelling. Facilitates the applicant's son, who is taking on a bigger role on the farming operations on the site. In summary, following a detailed assessment of the proposals, it's considered that the development would allow the provision of an appropriately sited agricultural workers' house to serve the needs of the farm. Subject to conditions that would be attached to any consent issued, it's not considered that there would be any significant adverse impact on the character or amenity of the local area. The conditions would include, that are attached, would include a condition restricting the habitation of the dwelling to an agricultural worker associated with the farm or their dependents. Therefore, recommending approval subject to the conditions attached, Chair.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions for Tina? Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Tina for the report. I just, in terms of houses in the Greenbelt, I want to move committee to condition 12 on page 74. I think that was the last point that Tina made, was about the condition that says it shall be limited to the person solely or mainly employed. Obviously, we've had this before where farms cease to exist, then lo and behold, the house that's been built for a farm worker appears on the market. Does this is item 12 strong enough to include or prohibit resale? If someone can come back to me, either Pauline or Tina or Monica, in terms of legal, because very often farms cease to exist, developers buy the farm, and then lo and behold, a house or houses appear on the market. If somebody can answer that, I'd be obliged, Chair.
Thank you. Monica, do you want to come in that point?
Yes, through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Scott. I mean, the condition as currently drafted, well, planning conditions ensure for the benefit of the land, so it would be there and it would be a standing condition. In terms, the issue with all agricultural conditions or all use conditions really is the fact that they can be difficult to enforce. However, I don't think there's really anything in terms of the wording that we could do to make it more robust. As you know, planning conditions have to meet certain tests. They have to fairly and reasonably relate to the permitted development. They have to be reasonable. They have to be certain, enforceable, and necessary. And in terms of Scottish Government policy, actually back in, I think, 2011, the Chief Planner then issued a letter to all planning authorities stating that the use of occupancy conditions is considered to be rarely appropriate and should be avoided. The reason for that is that the Scottish Government consider them to be overly onerous. They can result in difficulties for people, for example, to get mortgages. They consider them to be intrusive, resource intensive, and difficult to monitor and enforce. Therefore, the advice from the Chief Planner and Scottish Planning Policy, which, as the committee will be aware, are all material considerations in the consideration of planning applications, is that that they have to be limited really in their use, and they have to be reasonable. Therefore, I think in terms of restricting the occupancy, this is really as far as we could go without being without the condition being challenged. As I understand it, I think the applicant is aware of the condition and is happy for the condition to be imposed, and has sought an appropriate mortgage or a mortgage provider who's happy with that condition being imposed. But I think within the limits that are placed upon us by Scottish Government planning policy, this is probably as far as we can go without having the risk of challenge.
Can I have a supplementary, Chair?
Yes, okay, could you?
Obviously, I take on board what Monica says. So basically, if I've read the rules right, we can't toughen 12 up. 12 is there. We can't strengthen it or add more fibre to it in terms of resale, which means that, I mean, God forbid if that ceases to be an active farm and someone else buys it, there's no way we can basically protect any further use in those terms of suddenly the house appears on the market. We can't toughen it up, Monica. Have I got that right?
Through you, Chair. I mean, the condition is still there. Therefore, if we were aware of the resale, there is potentially if it met all other tests in terms of enforcement, the planning authority could potentially take enforcement action. The issue is, as I've been aware of it, I mean, you may remember many years ago we used to have planning agreements to deal with this sort of restriction, and a planning agreement is put on the title, so it binds the land, so no one would purchase a property with that planning condition or with that planning agreement obligation being there. We don't do that now for the same reason, as I mentioned previously, that Scottish Government policy is that would be overly onerous. Therefore, even if we did have a planning agreement, it could be challenged. So we would go through the process, we would grant it subject to a planning agreement, and then there would be a challenge, or they would look to discharge it, and we would have to discharge it because it's not considered reasonable. So it's not to say it's not there. The planning condition is there, and if we are aware of a future resale, then and we consider enforcement action as appropriate, then the planning authority can potentially do that. It's just the difficulty of being aware of future resale when the condition doesn't bind the land in the same way as a planning agreement does.
Thank you, Monica. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Councillor Wartaw?
Just to echo what Councillor Scott has been saying about condition 12, I don't really see the point of having it there. And when you look at the condition 12 and then you look at the papers coming later on our enforcement charter, I doubt whether, any violation of that condition under our proposed charter would justify taking any action. I just don't see the point in putting a condition in when you know it can't be enforced.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Jim Wardlaw, and I'm pleased to hear everything that Monica had to say, because out in this rural area here, there's many examples of derelict cottages that are lying vacant and falling down in the local area, and it's almost like condition 12's making a will from the grave, that forever after that's got to be a farm cottage. I don't think that's a fair situation to place people in, and particularly in the world we're in now, where farms are under increasing pressure. I can't see the point of having a condition 12, and I don't agree with wills for the grave either, just for the record.
Thank you, Councillor Ellison.
It's more broad point after Graham's contribution. Farming changes over a period of time, Graham. Families, kind of a young family, they can all live in the one house for a period of time. Things move on, next generation starts. They require a house of their own. By that time, anything on a particular farm could be outdated. You're talking about abandoned cottages. I've no idea about this farm, what is there or not. But they surely are entitled to modern facilities to live in as well. That item 12 is very onerous. It says it has to be someone who is working or has worked on that farm. So it actually restricts them very greatly on what they are doing. I think it's something that I would be looking to approve, because it allows the residences in a rural area to be modernised and allowing people to have modern facilities with in where they live. So I think it is appropriate what's being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Craig.
Yeah, I'll take on both what Graham's saying and what Alec's saying. Farms are businesses, they're commercial activities, and to allow those farms to continue in that business, it's often generational, that get handed down from father to son or father to daughter, whatever. So the need to have legislation like that is absolutely clear, and it's right that we should be doing that in order to keep those farms in local ownership and working. But I also take on board what Graham's saying. We have to be sure that when we're passing legislation or we're passing permissions like this, that it is going to be used for the purpose that we are passing it. So that's just the way of the world, I suppose. So I'm quite happy with this. I think due diligence has been done behind the scenes on the actual business itself. So I'm quite happy to go ahead with this.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chair. I've got experience of a similar situation where a dwelling was ancillary to the business, and the business folded and the property was sold on. Now, a property that's ancillary to the business, and something like this, to the farm or whatever, a modest sized property, this particular property was on the market for £500,000. I mean, that's quite a substantial property for most people. Now, personally, I see it as a bit of a loophole where people who own land and want to build ancillary properties, but they're not in keeping with, Alec makes a point, and he's in the business, obviously, so he knows. But unfortunately for any other people involved in whatever type of business or work, you go out and you buy a house and you travel to your work. Do you really need to have a property on the farm? Does it really have to be that you need to have it right there on the farm? Can you not just, people work shifts, people work odd times, we've all got to look, people purchase a property, you travel to your work. But more and more people are getting suspicious, and this clause that spoke about, it seems a bit toothless. So this example that I told you about just recently, that I know of, where the house went for sale, it was tragic circumstances because the business owner died and no one could have foreseen that or planned that. That was just the situation. But the size of the property that was built, it's on the market for £500,000. It just doesn't sit comfortable with me, Chair. And for all the length of time I've been a councillor, I've seen this over and over again, and I really don't like it. I'm not suggesting one way or another what we should do here. I'm just expressing a view, and I just it doesn't sit comfortable with me. And I think that's been pointed out by a couple of other contributors.
Thank you, Councillor Alison.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to come back in. It was just in the points that Davy raises. Can vary greatly. Whether you can stay on site or not, Davy. If you've got livestock, you need to be on.
Excuse me, Alex. Sorry. There's somebody else that had their mic unmuted there. Sorry, Alex. I wasn't interrupting you, but I just wanted to hear what you were saying. Chair, if you could just ask everybody to mute, please.
Yes, if everyone could mute if they're not speaking, please.
Thanks, Chair. David, it can vary greatly on the type of farm. If you've got livestock in the farm, you need to be on site to be able to properly look after them. There is also an issue now regarding, quite honestly, farm thefts, rural theft, and having people on site is important. Not in every case, but in this case. Also, no disrespect here, this is not a £500,000 house that's been proposed here. This is a different situation. And from what I can see on this one, it's a livestock farm, next generation, requiring modern housing. So sorry, I'm repeating myself. That's why I would support it.
Thank you. Councillor Wardle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite in favour of this, development. I have no problem with it whatsoever. My problem is simply that we're putting a condition on which we know in reality has no meaning. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, even 6 months' time. I just don't see the point of putting conditions on something like this, which we know can't be enforced. But the development itself, I have no problem with.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make a final point, obviously I came in at the beginning. Yes, they say all I wanted to do by raising it was to say that 12 should be toughened up, and I'll go back to my original reason, whether we like it or not, and I take the point that Alec Allison makes, and I listen vividly because in terms of his knowledge and experience, is that farms are going under, and I think increasingly farms will go under in terms of cease to trade. And what is happening, and we've seen it in Thornton Hall and East Kilbride, farms are going under, and guess who is buying the land? It's property companies. It's land developers buying farms. I mean, they're not buying the farms to continue it to the next generation. They're buying it to exploit for capital purposes. So that's why I asked for, and I take Monica's point that Condition 12 probably can't be strengthened. But the basis I brought it up was it's an undeniable fact that some farms that are going under, especially near urban areas, are not getting bought by other farmers to use as farms. They are being bought by development companies and land companies. That was the basis on which I raised about Condition 12. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agreed. Sorry, someone was trying to come in there?
I think it was just somebody saying agreed, Chair.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I think we'll take a comfort break now, because we've been going for more than an hour, and if we could come back at 11:20, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, just do the sediment by roll call again. Councillor Alec Allison.
Still here.
Councillor John Anderson.
Here.
Councillor John Bradley.
Here.
Councillor Arch Buchanan. Councillor Buchanan.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Jackie Burns. Councillor Margaret Cowie.
I'm here, Stuart.
Yep. Councillor Peter Craig.
Present.
Councillor Maureen Devlin. Oh, sorry, we've got apologies from Councillor Devlin. Councillor Mary Donnelly.
I'm here, Stuart.
Councillor Dorman's present. Councillor Fiona Dryburgh has left the meeting.
Councillor Cooper's here.
Sorry, yeah, we'll catch your subs in a wee minute. Councillor Hamilton's got an apology. Councillor Harrell's got an apology. Oh, sorry. Councillor Cooper, have you still got your microphone active?
No, I turned it off after I barked.
Thanks for that. Councillor Horsham.
I'm here.
Councillor LeBlond has left the meeting. Councillor Lennon.
I'm present.
Yep. Councillor Ian McCallan.
Here.
Councillor David McLaughlin.
Here.
Councillor Carol Nugent.
Yeah.
Councillor Graham Scott.
Here.
Councillor David Shearer.
Here.
Councillor Bert Thompson.
Here.
Councillor Jim Mortaw.
Here.
I haven't forgot the subs. Councillor Jerry Convery.
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Cooper's here, obviously. Councillor Alan Faulkner.
Present.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Agenda item 8 is application P21-1148, and that's on pages 77 to 88. And I'll ask Bernard to take us through the item. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought for the substitution of house types within a residential development located within the Hamilton Community Growth Area. The site is located to the north of Meathlernock Road, Hamilton, and is amid an area that is being developed for residential purposes. Planning permission was originally granted for the development in 2017 for a total of 320 houses. The applicant now seeks permission to amend the house types on 79 of the plots within the development in order to better reflect product changes and customer requirements. The properties within the development are a mixture of 3, 4 and 5 bedrooms with appropriate off-street parking provided. No changes to the previously approved road layout are proposed. In terms of the local plan, the site is designated as a community growth area suitable for residential development, and therefore no policy issues are raised. The consultation responses are summarised in section 4 of the report, and no objections have been received. Any matters raised can be addressed through the use of suitable planning conditions. One letter of representation has been submitted, primarily raising concerns about the existing road network and associated disruption due to ongoing construction activities. Unfortunately, whilst construction continues on site, there will be a degree of disruption. However, a condition is proposed concerning the provision of suitable staff parking during construction within this development site. The site is located within the Hamilton Community Growth Area, where residential development is supported. Permission has previously been approved for a development at this location, and the changes to the house types that were originally approved are relatively minor. There will be no increase in the number of units, whilst the existing road network and levels of parking remain unaltered. The existing planning obligation covering the larger Hamilton Community Growth Area will also remain in place. Overall, it's considered that the application complies with relevant local plan policies and is an acceptable form of development at this location. It's recommended that the application is granted subject to conditions.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions for Bernard? Councillor Donnelly?
Yes, Chair. Whilst at the moment I welcome this development, I have to bring it to the notice of the committee that the community have got serious concerns, like Meikle Lernock Community Council have got serious concerns about the state of the roads. And it is Brackenhill Farm that this is getting built on. So you can imagine that was a farm road. So it basically is like a duck track going forward. And I do know that the Community Council has been in discussions with planning, and I would like to know feedback from them. What was the outcome of that discussion?
Bernard?
Through you, Chair. There was a meeting last week with local members, and roads were in attendance at that as well, where some of the concerns that have been raised by the newly formed Community Council were raised with ourselves, and we're currently looking into those. Some of those issues related to ensuring that roads are swept, debris on the road, and we do have the site. I'll let Fraser come in if he wants to with some further details, but the site is regularly being visited to ensure that there are appropriate measures in place, such as road sweeping, wheel wash facilities, covered loads, and we will also be contacting the relevant companies just to remind them and reinforce what the requirements are to ensure that there's a minimum disruption to the surrounding road network.
Thank you, Bernard. Councillor Alston?
Thanks, Chair. Apologies if I missed what you said, Bernard. I'm just looking for clarification. The change of types, is it going to, I know the number of houses isn't changing, but is the number of bedrooms changing? Are they up or down at all? Sorry if you reported on that and I missed it.
Through you, Chair. The number of the bedrooms, what tends to happen, just partly with developments once they are built in phases, particularly with this one being in excess of 300 units. Sometimes when you do a first phase, you have developers that they contact the residents and seek feedback from them, and sometimes it can be just tweaks to the layout of the houses themselves. Other times it's the sizes, the orientation. One of the things that's been a recent addition to some developments where we've been entering discussions is with everybody working from home, providing sort of a home office area, things like this. So the bedrooms sizes of the houses are still 3, 4 and 5, and that's what was part of the original approval.
Yeah, sorry, Bernard, you haven't quite answered the question. Is the number of bedrooms in this development increasing? Or is it simply the other issues that you have raised, sizes, etc.? Is the number of bedrooms in this development increasing?
I would need to double check all the 79 plots, but in terms of the requirements for garden depth, on-street parking, off-street parking, all those things have been addressed and are being maintained. But in terms of the actual houses that are being replaced and the like-for-like number of exact bedrooms, I would need to double check that for you before I could come back and confirm one way or the other if the specific number of bedrooms throughout the 79 are identical.
Chair, just through you, I'm raising the question because if the number of bedrooms has increased, that increases the number of parking spaces required, and I think that would need to be taken into account going forward.
If I could just come in, I can confirm that the appropriate level of parking per unit is provided in curtilage So that has been fully addressed through discussion with roads, and there were some revisions to the plot boundaries just to ensure that adequate off-street parking is provided and meets with the road standards.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Fraser, you want to come in?
Yeah, really just echo what Bernard said there about the parking numbers. We've certainly fully considered that. And just for your comfort, initially when the plans came in, there was an issue with garage sizes being too small to count as a car parking space. And the developer amended the layout to accommodate the number of cars all required in accordance with the guidelines. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor Donnelly?
It was just, Bernard, if I can put it to you, Chair, if I can put it to you, through you to Bernard, is the situation in regards to the state of the roads getting taken into consideration, Bernard, with the company, the building company?
Fraser will answer that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is. We have inspectors that visit the site every second day and kind of witness mud on the road. The reports that have been getting back have been that the roads have been actually in a reasonably good condition, and that's partly because the majority of the lorries that use or are building on these sites exit via Meekillarnock Road towards Muttonhole Road, so they're largely avoiding going through the residential area. That said, we wish everything, and that is not the case sometimes. And when there is an issue, we've been raising that up with the site teams and getting additional sweepers put on. So I can confirm that Barratt Homes, they operate a brush motor or 2 hours per day. Bellway do 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, and Stuart Milne do 4 hours every day. So as a collective, the developers are kind of working together to make sure there's a road sweeper on Meekillarnock Road at those times. As I said, there is a potential that during earthwork operations that there may be an issue, and whilst that's a very rare occasion, we will be writing to the developers to highlight that local residents along Meekillarnock Road have been experiencing mud on the road, and we are aware of that, and we're looking to get them to take additional measures to reduce the impact on that, particularly when there's earth moving. But I visited the site myself one day to get a feel for what it was like, and was pleasantly surprised by the condition of the road at that time.
Thank you, Fraser.
Can I come back to you?
Yes, on you go.
Just to say I can concur with what Bernard has said, that the residents themselves have seen an improvement.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin?
Thanks, Chair. Chair, the condition of the road, I use that road fairly regularly. And the condition of the road with the mud, it comes and goes, it can change. And the point about the trucks leaving Meekillarnock Road to go up onto Muttonhole Road that Fraser had mentioned, it's not a planning issue, this, and forgive me for raising it here if you don't mind. But more for Fraser, at Brackenhill Crescent on Meekillarnock Road, just beyond that going towards Muttonhole Road, the speed limit changes from a 30 to a national speed limit. Now, you're lucky to reach 15 miles an hour, let alone 60 miles an hour. That road it's caving at the sides because it's so narrow as you go towards Muttonhole Road. It's fallen away at the side. There's some bits that are coned off. And if you meet one of these trucks coming the other direction, it's almost, it's a first gear situation trying to pass. So I wonder, given the increase in the development and the new houses, the more and more houses that are going to be built there, but if it continues, why are we not doing something about the road? Because the road leading coming from Meiklearnock to the current site, there's been a roundabout put in, the road's been widened further down to the development, but between the development and Mutton Hole Road, it's just hopeless, and more people, I would imagine, who live in those areas or continue, as the site grows, are going to want to use that road to access Mutton Hole Road to go, for instance, to East Kilbride, or out onto Straven Road to go towards Straven and beyond, or even just taking a shortcut, because if you come down Meiklearnock Road towards Eddowwood and the traffic lights, it's quite busy there as well. Is there anything in the pipeline to improve the old road that in the past would hardly have got used, but now these hundreds and hundreds of houses that are getting up here, is there anything in the plans to improve that road? Because it's just horrendous trying to negotiate through it. That's a question for Fraser, Chair.
Through you, Chair. Certainly we're aware of the condition of the rural section of Meiklearnock Road, Councillor, and as it's obviously the developers are largely causing the damage because of the volumes that are going up there, that they will be making good the damage that's been caused on a kind of ongoing basis, if you like. And certainly, it's trying to direct the traffic to have as less an impact as possible, and that's why we're directing them that way, so that they don't go through the residential part of Meiklearnock Road. In the longer term, there will be a new road which will eventually connect out onto Straven Road, and that's part of the plans, so that people would be kind of, the best roads to use would be to go into Straven Road, and then if they are going to East Kilbride, then presumably they would turn right along Mutton Hole Road. But largely, the TA that was done a way back didn't recommend that the Meiklearnock Road would need to be upgraded for that. There is, however, a contribution that the developers paying into for Mutton Hole Road, and it's largely to improve that along its length where required. So I hope that helps.
Chair, can I come back in? You mentioned there, Fraser, accessing Straven Road. Is this a brand new road that you mean cutting right through and bypassing old Meiklearnock Road? Is it? I see Bernard's nodding his head there. I'm interested on that because that existing road, and Mutton Hole Road itself isn't great, especially if you're going towards East Kilbride. If you go to Mutton Hole Road and you turn right, there's a very, very narrow section there. And the road, that's prior to this site being built, that road there's caving. There's a very, very kind of dangerous void on the right-hand side of the road, past the substation when you're coming away from this site going towards East Kilbride. Very, very narrow section of road. So Mutton Hole Road isn't ideal, but I'm interested that I'd love to see some upgrades to Mutton Hole Road, to be honest with you, but I'm interested in the point you made about accessing Straven Road from the site. So Bernard, looks as if he's ready to come in and deal with that one.
Through you, Chair, if it's okay. Just to confirm, at the present time, we've got a couple of other applications within the CGA, and part of the discussions associated with those are looking at getting a link which would be between Meiklearnock Road and Straven Road, and a small bridge over the Cadsall Burn which would link the two parts of the CGA, and it would give an alternative route. As I say, those discussions are ongoing, and we've got other applications in, and I can't say for certain just now because of the stage of the discussions, but they'll need to be presented to committee in due course, and looking at the phasing of when the roads, etc., would be formed and things like that. So when it comes to being presented to committee, we'll have a bit more detail for you. And although those applications are still under consideration, it may well be in the early part of next year that we're able to come forward with them and answer in a bit more detail the questions that you're asking.
Chair, with all due respect, what's any of this got to do with this particular planning application? I mean, this started out with something entirely different, and we're away onto roads now that have nothing to do with future developments that have absolutely nothing to do with it.
Point of order, Chair. Chair, I don't know that you invited Councillor Cooper to speak there, and I'm quite agreed with what she said, but the point that Alec Allison raised about the potential size of the houses, that could impact on the amount of traffic that's using the road. So I'm sorry, Margaret, if that doesn't suit you, but I think it's a valid question.
Councillor Donnelly?
Sorry, it was to come back to Bernard. He had made reference to upgrading Meikle Road in order to accommodate this. Have you got a timescale for that, Bernard?
It wasn't upgrading Meikle, it was a link road through the CGA. As I say, the applications are currently under consideration at the moment, and we're still getting further information in for those, but we're hoping that in the sort of early part of next year we'll be able to bring those to planning committee, and as part of that discussion we'll be able to by then have a bit more knowledge about the phasing of the link road and how exactly it would come in and what the timescales may be. Also, that would be dependent on the build out of the number of units, but it's ultimately it would link both sides of the CGA and Straven Road and Meikle Road. And as I say, we've got separate applications under consideration which we will bring to the committee in due course.
Okay. Chair, can I come back in quickly?
Yes, you can.
Will be brief. It was just to say to Margaret as well, I'm bringing comments here because it's been raised with me with residents. So it would be remiss if I didn't raise the concerns in terms of the road because of the building, although they do support the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got absolutely no concerns about Mary raising the condition of the roads round about the development. What I am asking is, my question was, what was the relevance of the detail that Bernard's gone into about future roads down the road, as it would be, and things that are not even on the table yet? I can't see the relevance of that. I do see it's entirely relevant for Mary's question regarding our residents' concerns about the state that the road's currently in and how that's being dealt with. And I think Fraser Jack gave a good explanation to that. So that was my point.
I don't see any other hands, so I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 9, it's application P21-1391, and that's in pages 89 to 108. And I'll ask Tina to take us through the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. It's a detailed application for 105 dwellings, along with a Muga and landscaping and associated infrastructure at the East Overton site in Straven. The site is known as phases 3 and 4 of the larger East Overton master plan, and the site is located, the master plan site is located on the northeast edge of Straven. Planning permission in principle was granted back in 2014, and so the application is the third and fourth part of that. Detailed consent is sought for a residential development of the 105 houses in these two phases. And as I say, that is along with a Muga and a recreational area with the landscaping and infrastructure. More specifically, the proposal comprises of two phases. Phase 3 is 54 units and phase 4 is 51. Within phase 3, there's some semi-detached and terraced properties. Phase 3 of the layout would link into the first phase of the master plan site via two access roads, known now as Henderson Way and Barn Todd Road. And the layout would link with the established internal road layout, road network of the established housing to access Glassford Road via the existing roundabout. Phase 4 would be connected with the established first phase as well via Rickard Avenue, Black Street and Raceway, and would ultimately link into the future master plan area, East Overton residential area, which lies to the north. In terms of land use, the application site is identified within the LDP2 as part of the Council's housing land supply within the general urban area. And as I say, the master plan has been approved some years ago. In terms of consultations, there are no adverse comments subject to conditions, and they're set out in section 4 of the report. Section 5 details that we have received 20 letters of objection and 3 letters of comment, and the points are set out within the report in section 5. Many of the points relate to integration with the existing phases and wider roads issues. In response, the Council's Road Services has been heavily involved in looking at the detailed layouts in discussion with the developer's traffic consultant. It's considered that the proposed layout is acceptable in terms of traffic and pedestrian safety and would not be appropriate to have a vehicular access from the site to Hamilton Road, which we've looked at, and as I say, all links through into Glassford Road. But roads are happy with all of the detail, the layout and the parking provision. The layout has been carefully assessed to ensure that it meets the Council's requirement in terms of the residential development guide and in terms of the design and layout, which we're more than happy with. Turning to our assessment and conclusions, the application is the principle of residential development has been firmly established by the approval of the PPP back in 2014, and development has been ongoing since then. The proposal will result in the development of the 3rd and 4th phases of a larger master plan site. As I say, we're happy with the layout and the design from Bancon Homes, and satisfied that it's been designed in such a manner that it takes cognizance of the surrounding area and has properly been assessed in terms of impact on the adjacent historic building, which is known as East Overton House. Furthermore, the larger recreational area is very supported in terms of providing a MUGA at this location, which would provide additional amenity opportunities for existing residents and the new residents alike. Turning to community infrastructure, which we set out in paragraph 6.9. Just for members' information, the community infrastructure contributions for community and education were agreed as part of the PPP. They are included in the legal agreement, and staged payments have been made for both these elements to cover the area in full for based on 480 units. So they have been paid and received. In regard to affordable housing, just for clarification, we understand that the housing developer would be paying a financial contribution for affordable housing for these 2 phases. However, separately, Bancon are speaking to our housing colleagues in terms of bringing forward an affordable housing site on land that we own to the west of these units, of these phases. However, that would be subject to a separate planning application for consideration in the future. But Bancon would be meeting the requirements for this development through financial contributions. Therefore, recommending approval subject to the conditions attached. However, I would just like to highlight that following further discussion since the papers were finalised, we are proposing a technical amendment to condition number 8, and if okay with committee, the condition would read that no development shall take place on the site until a scheme approved in writing by the planning authority for the carriageway widening of Berrybriggs Road to permit two-way flow of traffic along its entire length has been implemented in full accordance with the agreed scheme. The thrust of that condition is really just the same as it was, but following some discussions with our legal colleagues, it's just to make it more enforceable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions for Tina? I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree with the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 10 is application P211183, and that's on pages 109 to 125. So 126. I'll ask Bernard to take us through the item. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. The Planning Committee will recall that this application was originally before them last month, where a decision was deferred due to a lack of information relating to access, pedestrian routes and associated safety concerns. The application relates to a site in Lanark Road, Upper Braidwood, Carluke, where planning permission was previously approved for a residential development of 140 units. Permission is now sought to amend the house types on 125 of the 140 plots approved. In terms of the information requested at the last Planning Committee, I would clarify that when planning permission was previously granted by the Planning Committee, roads required that the vehicular access to the site should be via a signalised junction which incorporates microprocessor optimised vehicle actuation control measures, and these signals should be installed by the Council's traffic signal maintenance contractor. The new junction will be subject to a full detailed design review and will include a pedestrian phase. In addition, further analysis of the existing signalised A73 Stewart Street, Glamis Avenue is to be submitted for approval before work starts on site. Furthermore, a safety audit is required to be undertaken, and the possible relocation of the existing bus stop should be the subject of further discussions. A 2-metre wide footway would be included along the frontage of the site where it meets the A73, and there will also be a link to Old Lanark Road for cyclists. Members had raised issues about safe routes to school, therefore the application was deferred to enable time to consider these points and elaborate on findings in an updated report. The assessment of safe routes to school falls out with the planning remit and is primarily a matter between parents and the school authorities. Any primary school pupil that lives more than a mile from their catchment school by the shortest walking route is entitled to free school transport. School transport is provided on the same basis for any secondary pupil that lives more than 2 miles away from their catchment school. In the case of this residential development, it's considered that the distance to Braidwood Primary School, St Athanasius, Primary School and Carluke High School are less than the threshold distance for the provision of free school transport. Unless an assessment carried out by the road safety team, instigated by parents in liaison with the school authority, deems a walking route for a child accompanied by an adult to be unsafe. In response to an application for free mainstream school transport due to road safety, Education Resources measure the distance from home to school using a geographical information system in accordance with agreed procedures. In the case of the nearby primary school, this may result in a qualification on the grounds of distance, dependent on the individual home to school distance being ascertained from this process. The routes do involve having to cross the A73 Lanark Road, which is a busy route, and being the principal road corridor between Lanark and Carluke. The safety concerns in crossing this road were fully considered during the determination of the original planning permission, and relevant conditions relating to road safety were applied, and these conditions have been reapplied. Condition 8 requires installation of a signalised junction with pedestrian phases prior to the occupation of any dwellings. This will ensure vehicular access to the site from the A73 will be controlled by a 3-arm signal-controlled junction. The wording of this condition has been revised to provide more clarity by including specific reference to the pedestrian phase on the A73 at the proposed access point. Condition 12 stipulates that the new traffic signal installation to serve the development shall be undertaken by the Council's traffic signal maintenance contractor. Also, Condition 32 relating to safety audit has been added to ensure a full safety audit is undertaken prior to any commencement of work on site. It should also be noted that in the report it states that an informative note will be attached to the decision notice if permission is granted, advising that a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit order will be required as part of development. With the implementation of these measures, children accompanied by adults as determined within the walking route to school assessment guidelines will be able to cross the A73 safely. on the west side of which is an existing footway, thereon providing pedestrian connection via the existing footway and footpath network to Curluke and Braidwood. Overall, the proposals represent an appropriate form of residential for the site, and it is therefore recommended that detailed planning consent be granted, subject to the conditions listed.
Thank you, Bernard. Councillor Shearer?
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Bernard for that report. I also thank the Roads Department for investigating the issues that were raised by all the local members about the safe routes to school and pedestrian access to this site. For Bernard's information, the pronunciation is St Athanasius Primary School in Curluke. But to come back to the more serious point, I am glad that the pedestrian issues and the road issues have all been thoroughly examined, and it seems that mitigations have been put in place. I would hope that the pedestrian crossing, after a number of houses have been built, that pedestrian crossing would be up and operational rather than waiting until the housing development was complete, so that as soon as children move in there and have to go to school, there is a suitable crossing in place. I would seek that assurance, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, just to confirm that Condition 8 requires the installation of the signalised junction with pedestrian phase prior to the occupation of any dwellings.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 11, that's Planning Enforcement Charter, and that's on pages 127 to 150. I'll ask Tony to take us through the item. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to seek committee approval to revise the Council's Planning Enforcement Charter. The Planning Act requires a planning authority to prepare an enforcement charter. It's to contain the Council's policies for taking enforcement action, how members of the public can report breaches of planning control, and also information on how the enforcement system works. National policy on enforcement set out in Circular 10/2009. Now, as a general principle, it states that planning authorities have discretion on whether to take enforcement action against any breach of planning control. Enforcement action should only be necessary if it's in the public interest to do so. And it's not because someone doesn't have planning permission or don't make a retrospective plan application when we ask for one. So the breach, to be in the public interest, should unacceptably affect either public amenity or the use of land and buildings meriting protection in the public interest. So, enforcement action should always be proportionate to the breach of planning control to which it relates. So, for example, it's usually inappropriate to take action against a trivial or a technical breach of planning control, which has no material adverse planning implications for the wider area or locally. Unauthorised development by homeowners often falls into this category. And there might be the householder has been unaware of the need for permission in the first place, or that the development qualified as permitted development, not needing a planning application. We'll also say that many inquiries the Council receives relate to unauthorised development by small businesses or the self-employed. I think it's fair to say some of these breaches are deliberate, but in many cases the owner or operator of the business has carried out the unlawful development in good faith, believing that no permission was needed. I think you can maybe take an example, someone who starts working from home and then the business grows and then gets out of control and it becomes a scale where permission's needed. So the initial aim in this type of case is to explore whether the business can be allowed to continue at the site at its current level of activity or even less intensively. And the advice in the circular is to explore ways in which the planning issues can be overcome. And this may result in the grant of a conditional planning permission, and that would enable the owner to continue in the business at the site without harming the local amenity. And just as a general rule, the circular just said that for all enforcement cases, the use of informal negotiations is promoted to resolve cases. And it's only when this is unsuccessful and the breach is significant that enforcement action should be taken. So when we came to review the enforcement charter, we took account of a fairly significant increase in the number of enforcement inquiries we've received since March 2020. That's shown in Table 4. in a table in section 4 of the report, you'll see that in 2020-21, the number of inquiries increased by roughly 50% compared to the previous 3 years. And this year, the first 8 months of this financial year, the number of cases we received is broadly similar to the number received in 2021. So we already had a fairly significant increase for 2021, and that's intensified this year. So a key part of the review has been to consider whether the current process for dealing with new cases remains appropriate in view of the current workload, but also taking account of the policies set out in the circular. And that's resulted in the development of a 4-stage process. So I'll just go through that very quickly. Stage 1, we check whether the inquiry itself relates to a planning matter in the first place. We've listed a number of breaches in section 4.2, which we will not investigate. And they include land ownership disputes, the enforcement of conditions on title deeds, the clearing of land or trees unless they're protected, and health and safety matters or site working practices. However, if that inquiry can be dealt with by another service, it will be forwarded to them if it's within their remit. So there will be cases where a new building is permitted development. For example, we've had a number of cases where some houses or garden rooms have been built over the period, but concerns, so it's permitted development, but concerns are raised about the noise generated from it, just due to the activity within it by the owners of the property. So we wouldn't investigate that, but we'd pass it on to environmental services to investigate in terms of any noise pollution happening. The second stage of the process is if we identify a breach has occurred, and we normally need to carry out a site visit. So the timescales for carrying out the visit depend on the priority the case is given. And in section 4.3 of the report, we describe the criteria that's going to be taken into account in deciding the level of priority to be given. So the timescales we've set are considered reasonable, given the current workload. And so it's going to mean that lower priority cases, such as householders, for example, may not be investigated for up to 8 weeks. What I would say, though, we'll keep those timescales under review as the workload pressures change, and we can tweak the timescales for carrying out the site visit. So when following that investigation, we find a breach has not occurred, or it's immune from action because of the time that's elapsed, the case is closed and the customers are advised of that decision with an explanation. So stage 3, where we've identified a breach, we decide whether taking enforcement action is merited, and if so, in what form. So again, I'll go back to the point in the circular that planning enforcement is a discretionary function, and formal action should only be taken where it's in the public interest to do so. So we're going to carry out what's called a triage assessment. So that's carried out to determine the most appropriate course of action. And we categorise the breach in terms of the nature and severity of the breach, and also the severity of the impact arising from it. So where the breach is minor in scale and impact, or it's acceptable in planning terms in accordance with planning policies, it'll be generally the case that it won't be in the public interest to take any further action, and the case will be closed. And I think a fair number of householder breaches, when the building is perhaps a few centimetres over what's permitted development, or it's closer to the boundary just by a small margin than it should be, those are the types of cases we wouldn't take forward. The second category could be involve those that could be made acceptable or regularised with some minor amendments, and we will seek to negotiate changes so the breach becomes permitted development, not requiring planning permission, or it may result in the submission of a retrospective planning application. And finally, there'll be cases where the breach is more significant in scale and likely to be made capable. Likely to be made acceptable in planning terms, or at least without significant amendments, or it requires further action, urgent action to prevent further harm and impact on public amenity or safety. So then we come to the final stage of the process, and that's the outcome of the whole thing. So once a breach is categorised and we determine it should be pursued, there's a number of ways we can manage this. So the 3 main approaches. One is to first of all negotiate a solution, and that's always the first port of call for us. And this involves trying to sort out the situation by negotiating with the person and being asked to stop the activity and get them to carry out work to put right any harm that's caused, or to modify it, so it doesn't require permission, or to make a retrospective application. That goes back to what I was saying at stage 3. In some cases, we will get the retrospective planning application. Now, until a decision is made on that application, formal action won't be pursued. A retrospective application is only encouraged where the situation has no negative effects, or if the operations can be made acceptable by placing conditions on any planning permission. I think we've said this before at committee, that retrospective applications are dealt with like any other applications, and that includes carrying out neighbour notification and publicity. The decision on the application will take into account the local development plan, responses, consultees, and the impact on the area and public safety. But we can't refuse an application simply because it is retrospective. And finally, and it's probably in a very small number of cases, we do take enforcement action by serving a notice. It's only when someone actually being served with the notice and doesn't comply with its requirements that an offence is carried out under the Planning Act. And it's only then that the council can seek to punish that breach. And if that is the case, we have to refer the case to the Procurator Fiscal to get them to decide whether to take that forward for prosecution in the Sheriff Court. So it's a very rare occasion that happens. So that's me run through what we're proposing to do in terms of the enforcement process. So recommendation therefore is to approve the amendments to the Charter and to authorise the Head of Planning and Economic Development to modify the document to take account of drafting and presentation matters. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I get a feeling, Tony's presentation there, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I get a feeling that I wonder if we have the will and the manpower to enforce anything. Because over the years, there seem to be more and more people treat the council, the planning in particular, with contempt. And I think that people just go ahead and do what they want because they know they're not getting much retribution back to them. And I get a feeling that, first of all, that we've not got a great will to do anything. And second, have we actually got the manpower to follow up on things? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tony.
Yes, I'll answer Councillor Thompson to you, Chair, if that's okay. Certainly in terms of the will to take enforcement action, yes, we always use enforcement action as a last resort. And as I said in my presentation, we try to negotiate as far as we can to make things better. But often we come to a point where that isn't the case. I forget what the number is in terms of the notices we serve every year, but I think it's between 15 and 20, which, considering the number of we get, that's quite a high proportion, relatively speaking. So if we think something merits enforcement action because it's in the public interest to do so, we will do that. In terms of manpower, with the enforcement team, it's relatively small. We've got 3 officers, covers the whole of South Lanarkshire. 2 of the officers are just very new, recent graduates who've just joined the council in the last month or so. So they, at the present moment in time, trying to learn the ropes and find their feet. But as they build up experience, and it's seen from early days that they are going to do that, we will be in a much better position to tackle the backlog that we have. And as I said, we'll keep those timescales for carrying out the first site visit under review, and we'll change them as things improve, hopefully.
Right, thanks for your answer, Tony. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shearer.
Thank you, Chair. I thank Tony for this report. Unfortunately, I am still of the opinion that enforcement action is a toothless tiger. It can roar all it likes, but the developers know that there's very little can be done. And I accept that reports have to go to the Procurator Fiscal, who is a very busy man or woman dealing with murders, rapes, all sorts of other crimes. A breach of a planning condition is a very low priority, and it's only if the Fiscal deems it appropriate will the Fiscal put it before the Sheriff, who again is a very busy person and is dealing with much more serious cases and may dismiss a breach of a planning condition as irrelevant. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a complete revamp from the top to actually give enforcement officers the powers that they require to make developers do what they're supposed to do because the conditions are put there for a very good and valid reason. Now, the question to Tony is, and I heard your report, what I am concerned about, Tony, is we very often have repeat offenders, usually the big national builders, who do not major breaches, but small and irritating breaches on each and individual site they're on. They start too early, they make too much noise, they don't clean up after themselves, and they do it continuously. It's low-level stuff, but it's continual low-level stuff. And I would like to know, how do we crack down on that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Shearer is right. The powers that we have, the set by the legislation, and what I've described today is pretty much as far as we can go in many cases. You're right about reporting things to the Procurator Fiscal as well. As it happens, we have a case with them at the moment and they've taken it on. And the case is due to start in the Sheriff Court in the new year. So that's always good to see that they're not ignoring us completely. And we'll see what the outcome of that one is. We do have powers as well in very extreme cases if something's really significantly affecting the means or road safety in an area to serve a stop notice, and/or less likely to get an interdict served to stop works completely. So that's happened in the past as well. But again, it's horses for courses, I guess, is the phrase when we use that. In terms of the repeat offenders, and you talked there, Councillor Shearer, about the house builders. Again, we try to negotiate with them. We had the discussion just before the Meath Lennox Road application, where it looks like officers and roads have got together with the developers to try and manage a solution so that the dirt on the road is being looked at and regularly dealt with. And if we need to, we can step in and get back to that and get them to do it. We do have powers to serve a breach of condition notice. Generally terms, it's pretty meaningless, to be fair, because the amount of penalty that a developer would get in those kind of cases is very small compared to what they're going to get through the development. But as I say, we do. That's the point where we come to try and negotiate very strongly with developers.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I thank Tony for his report. There's nothing in Tony's report that wouldn't benefit from more and more planning enforcement officers and more planning enforcement powers for the planning enforcement officers. Having said that, there's elements of this that the subjective element of the officers deciding low priority, medium priority, high priority. Obviously, the subjective nature means that one person's low priority is maybe another person's high priority. The woman who phones us, and there's not an elected member here of any political stripe who's not had the phone call, my neighbour's put up an 8-foot fence, it's a disgrace, I want it down. We've all had that. So the idea that that's to get sort of low priority because it's not in terms of industrial or in terms of development, there has to be some recognition of the anger or the intrusion into the lives of the people who, yes, it might be in the big scale of things a low priority, but to them it's a big priority. And if it is treated as a low priority, we all know what's going to happen. Councillors, again, of all political stripes will get a phone call. I reported this, councillor, 6 weeks ago, nothing has happened. So we're going to have to deal with that. Another one is in terms of I'm looking at all the priorities, and I haven't seen it. And my view would be it's a high priority is with companies are dealing with people who are operating businesses from residential properties. It's amazing the number of them that are going on. We all know it's an attempt to cheat. They're operating from their house because they're paying council tax from the house. They're trying to cut back. They don't want to pay higher business rates from a property somewhere. So they're operating from a domestic situation. And of course, some of them involve vehicles and vehicles impinging upon the lives and the amenity of people in the area, and sometimes even noise that are impinging upon. So these are all the things that are the problems I see with this. Again, nothing in Charter that wouldn't benefit from certainly going away. I think the idea of 3 enforcement officers for a local authority with a population of about 320,000 is ludicrously low. We need more, and as my colleague Bert Thompson and David Shearer said, they need more powers as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Tony, do you want to come back in at that point?
I suppose just a couple of things there. I think we've recognised certainly over the last 18 months when the number of enforcement cases has mushroomed. We haven't kept customers informed as well as we could have, I don't think. So as part of this process of looking at the overall process, the 4 stages, in the background and side by side, we're looking at how we can keep customers up to date with what's happening. So the initial acknowledgement letter will tell them what priority is being given to their case and how long they can maybe wait to expect feedback on that. So I often think that customers are often happier if they know what's going on. If they don't hear anything, that's when it tends to get a wee bit upset and approach local members. And I take the point about residential developments, businesses at residential properties. Again, we take each one in its merits. You'll have heard us use that phrase before. It's sometimes the case that the scale is such that it doesn't merit taking action. But we've got a policy about working from home, and we use the criteria that we have in that kind of case to determine whether permission's required in the first place, and then secondly, is it going to be acceptable? We do try and work with businesses, and we work with our economic development colleagues to try and find a better alternative site if that's the desired outcome as well. Well, that answers Councillor Scott.
Okay. Just one supplementary, Chair, is that we've had in the recent past in my colleague Councillor Thompson's ward, where we had a shed and timber business, a quite sizable shed and timber business operating from a domestic residence. So, and it was quite a major business, and I know there's some in East Kilbride as well. So it is a problem, and we know why they're doing it, that people are trying to get out of the business rates, and they're also, because of COVID, they feel it's better to operate from a house environment. But again, there's nothing here that won't benefit from more planning enforcement officers and more planning enforcement powers. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Water?
Yeah. On page 129, lists breaches that the planning team will not investigate, and there are 2 in there that concern me a wee bit. One is health and safety matters and site working practices, and the other one is construction working hours. Now, we condition planning applications and we insist on wheel washing, etc. We insist on working hours so it doesn't disrupt the local community. And for the life of me, I can't see why those 2 issues are not going to be investigated by the planning team, particularly health and safety. If there's a health and safety issue, surely that has to have a priority. And the working hours, I mean, working hours conditioned, to protect the local community. Does that mean if a developer decides he's going to do weekend working when he's conditioned not to, that we're just going to ignore it? I don't know why those 2 bullet points have been included in that section.
Yeah, through you, Chair, if that's okay. Just taking both those things one at a time. So health and safety issues, it kind of goes back to the discussion we had about the site in Rutherglen earlier on. In the health and safety generally isn't a planning matter. And if there's concerns about the way a site is being developed, then the health and safety executive have powers to step in there. We can't address that. When it comes to hours of operation, doing construction of housing developments, for example. Again, we normally rely on environmental services to investigate that. They normally give us advice on what the appropriate hours of operation should be, and we use that as we often add what's called an informative to the decision notice, just to highlight to the developer what hours we should be sticking to. But if there's a breach of those, then it would fall to environmental services to investigate that and take action as appropriate.
Thank you, Johnny. Councillor Alison?
Sorry. Can I supplement it? I'm not quite sure, that response is what I'm looking for, that we're going to devolve responsibilities here, there and everywhere. I think the planning authority should be the lead authority on this, and they should be the ones that instigate the action, not depending on other branches of health, environmental services to come in and point the issue out. I think planning should be involved at the very heart of it.
Okay, Councillor Alison.
Thanks, Chair. Number of things through this. First of all, I would agree with some of the other comments, Councillor Scott, etc., about the requirement for ensuring that we have enough staff to be able to carry out enforcement action. As councillors, we can't really deal with that unless we are clearly told that that is a problem, and then it quite honestly becomes part of the budget process. But we never really get that level of communication, if that's what's required for us to be able to take these financial decisions. The first point I actually noticed in this was you have to decide whether it's in the public interest to take enforcement action. Well, if the public come to you, they're obviously interested. So why would you not then take action? Because obviously they feel that it is in their benefit that whatever enforcement action they deem to be appropriate is required. And I do understand, I see Monica's suddenly put her hand up in the different perceptions, but I think they are connected in how we take it forward. One of the other things that I've found previous years, Tony, is when we're working, is that the way that you will accept, and I mean you, the enforcement team, not personal, that statements made by developers seem to be accepted without any backup or not being evidence-based. And that tends to drag many of the issues on. Some of the ones I've been dealing with are now years old, and you can't get a conclusion. Developers say they're going to do this, then you find out they can't, they are not doing it, etc. And again, whether that's a staffing issue or not. So whereas this paper is important, it's not as important as the work that's done on the ground to actually take things forward. Two other particular points. I'm noting a lot of emails I'm copied into now where members of the public have raised an issue, and the response they get is it's been treated as a stage 2 complaint. Then they email back, this isn't a complaint, it's an inquiry. Why are we continually putting these in as stage 2 complaints? And is that altering the figure? It's obviously altering the figures that you showed us earlier. Two final points. The fixed penalty notices at 4.6. What level are they? And is it simply if you use one fixed penalty notice on an issue, then that's it dealt with, no matter what they do? Or does it become repetitive if they haven't done it over a period of time, another fixed penalty notice? Or is this a cheap get out of jail free card? Another thing, just to point, things are changing and the number of people that are being asked now to work from home, whereas the example given of a timber yard in your back garden is quite clearly I think abuse of the system, and it's moved out to domestic issue. A lot of people are going to be working from home, and how is that going to be anticipated or worked through? Because a lot of the domestic planning we do I'm not sure that it allows for that. Sorry, a bit of a ramble, but I think I've covered all the points, Tony. If you could raise them.
Thank you. I think we'll bring Monica in at that point, Tony.
Yeah.
Monica?
Sorry, Chair, I was muted there. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Through you. Initially, I just wanted to step in just to perhaps give a bit of more context to the reference to public interest in the report. Enforcement action under the planning legislation has to be human rights compliant. The reason for that is it intervenes with convention rights, the right to a fair trial, the right to respect for private and family life, the right to a person's protection of their property. That means that any intervention by a public body in relation to those rights has to be proportionate, reasonable and legitimate. And that's really where the reference to public interest comes. So there may be a breach, but before the planning authority or the public body can do anything, they have to ensure that what they're doing is reasonable and proportionate where it engages a convention right. And that's just really the context for the reference to public interest. And then that is continued in terms of prosecution as well, because obviously for a prosecution, a person has a right to a fair trial. So again, it engages convention rights. In terms of also just to perhaps in relation to what Councillor Warto had said about the limitation on the planning service, was just really to see the planning service can really only take action in relation to planning matters, because that's it only has powers to do so. Therefore, to take action in relation to health and safety matters, for example, where there wasn't a planning condition, would be ultra vires of the planning authority, and that's why it's limited in certain ways. To take Councillor Edison's last point in terms of the fixed penalty notices, just in terms of when a fixed penalty notice is served, you can't serve more than one fixed penalty notice in relation to a particular step or activity. So if a fixed penalty related to a specific activity, and then that was paid, then that would then mean that there wouldn't be any prosecution. So that's really the issue with fixed penalty notices. It doesn't rectify the breach. It punishes the perpetrator, but doesn't ultimately rectify the breach, and that's the difficulty with that option as enforcement. But it is something else in the enforcement team's armoury, so it is something we can use. But again, you have the issue when you have someone who is just really not wanting to comply with enforcement action, they're unlikely to pay the fixed penalty notice either, which is the issue. But in those circumstances, you would have the option where they didn't pay the fixed penalty notice of continuing to refer them to the fiscal on that matter. But it was just to answer that final point, Councillor Allison. I think was that all the points you raised about the fixed penalty notice?
The level of it.
The level of it. I would need to check. It was £2,000 at one point. I'm not sure whether that has been increased, but I can check that for you and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Monica. Pauline? Pauline, you able to come in?
Apologies, Chair, I was still on mute. Been a long morning. I was starting off by saying, Chair, that members are right. Planning enforcement is a very blunt instrument. And there's many a time I know when I'm approached and people would like me to get in a JCB and go down and stop somebody doing something, and that would be really, really tempting. But I think that the report from Tony lays out that there are other departments like environmental health, like roads, like the health and safety executive. We've got much stronger powers to deal with issues where there's real harm to amenity, because members' planning is really about how something looks. And in most cases, nobody dies as a result of doing something without planning permission. That's not, I mean, I'm not making light of it. I'm just pointing out that it's the powers are very limited, and you know that, members. Councillor Allison asked about why do we log things as a stage 2 complaint. I mean, I think the thing is, when is a complaint not a complaint? If somebody writes in and says their neighbour's doing something that they shouldn't be doing, well, we investigate it. That's a complaint. And there's often a bit of to and fro, and then we'll answer the complaint. And very often the answer is, well, we can't do anything about it. They haven't breached planning, or the fence that they've built that you don't like is 0.1 of a metre higher than it should be, but it's not in the public interest to take action. Therefore, we're not going to take any action. Then the only way that the complainant can go any further is to go to the Ombudsman. So that's why we then log it as a stage 2. They can then go to the Ombudsman if they're so minded, and that then closes off that complaint. Otherwise, there'll be no resolution either way. The other thing, members, is I think it's no surprise to people how much the caseload of enforcement has gone up since the start of the pandemic. I mean, you'll note the figures, they've doubled. And I don't think that's necessarily because people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing since the start of the pandemic. That there may well be an element of that, but I think it's because people are in their houses more, they're working from home, they're in their neighbourhoods, they're going for walks in the locality, and they're noticing what's going on a lot more and taking exception to it. And I think, you'll have noticed as well from your caseload, from your constituents, people are just really not very happy at the moment, and they're quite disgruntled. And I mean, that's coming across loud and clear. And a lot of it is neighbours' disputes. And we try and mediate between parties to reach a resolution, but very often the dispute isn't really a planning dispute. It starts off and they approach us as a planning dispute. And the kind of classic one is neighbours built a shed in their garden. The shed would either be permissible under permitted development rights, or it's just slightly too big, but not so big that we would take enforcement action. Well, it's not actually that the neighbours complaining about the shed, but the neighbours are maybe having parties in the shed because, they're not able to have people in their houses, so they're making a noise that's causing disturbance. Now, under those kind of issues, environmental health have got powers, planning don't have powers. But a lot of the issues are genuine neighbour disputes. And what you often find is where neighbours haven't got on, or there have been issues in the past, a lot of them have grown up in the recent past. I think in terms of resources, members, I think, to be honest, even if you were to give us more planning enforcement officers and we were to investigate the cases faster and more timeously, would we actually be able to do anything more than we're doing? I don't think so. I think we'd still have to prioritise. We'd still have to look at the public interest test. There would still be the issues of real harm where we'd have to use other powers or point complainants towards other powers, invoke other powers that planning doesn't have. And just the kind of final point that Councillor Allison made in terms of resources into planning and our ask, and that being seen through the budget process, we did bring a report to Community and Enterprise Committee last week asking for additional input into the planning service for new planning graduates. And I'm very pleased to say that members of the committee will recall that, and you approved that we could employ 3 planning graduates for a 2-year period, and we're having difficulty recruiting members, which is another issue. But we're very grateful for that moving forward. And in terms of that, under the new legislation, members may be aware that one of the things that will happen is that the government is saying they're going to put up planning fees. It's been a long time in the coming, but the newest indication is start of next year, planning fees will go up quite a lot. Also, we'll be able to charge for discretionary things that we can't charge at the moment. That's things like pre-application discussions and advice, discharge of conditions. So there is a chance, and this is a general point, there is a chance we'll have more money coming in. Now, the government will expect some of that money to be invested into the service for whatever aspect of planning that may be. But, as head of planning, obviously I would like that money, if it's forthcoming, to come into the planning service. But we also have to be mindful of the corporate responsibilities that I hold and that the director holds and the chief executive holds, that in the past case when planning hasn't met its fee income because the industry wasn't booming as it is now, that other services that had a surplus had to bail out planning because we were running a deficit. So all the while, when you're making budgetary decisions, that all has to be weighed up. But just finally, Chairman, if we're talking about resources into planning, I'd be really happy to have that debate with members. But my own personal view would be I would rather any resources and investment went to creating development, to creating housing and jobs, and not just on punishing neighbours who aren't getting on. And I'm not trivialising it, but a lot of the instances that we do come across do fall into that category. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Monica, you want to come back in?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. It was just to confirm the amount of the fixed penalty notice for Councillor Allison. I have confirmed it is £2,000 for the failure to comply with an enforcement notice, and it's £1,500 if that amount is paid within 15 days. In terms of a breach of condition notice, the fixed penalty is £300 and £225 if paid within 15 days. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Monica. I don't see any other hands, so I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. I don't have any other urgent business, so I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance. Wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and hopefully a healthy New Year. And we'll see you all in the next year. Take care. Thanks very much for attending.
Thanks, Chair. Bye.
Thanks.